Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague and fellow writer over at the Hockey Writers for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Alex Hobson. Alex, playoffs are in session. How are you doing, or how are you holding up is the most important question right now.
The emotions are north, south, east, and west. That's where I'm at right now. 3 games into this series, Leafs taking an early lead, which is, good, but as previous series have shown us, we can't get excited until they actually have that 4th win. So, yeah, emotions are all over the place. It's about what I expected for this time of year.
Yeah, I think what we should do is get a heart rate monitor, kind of like what Steve Dangle does, and have that throughout the whole entire game, because everything's on high right now. And yeah, we are going to get into a lot of playoff talk for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But first and foremost, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there who are either watching or tuning in or just having a great day in general. Hope you are having a fantastic one, and all the best to you all. Before we get started, this week's show is brought to you by the Hockey Writers, Sports Betting Guide, a brand new source for your daily sports betting odds, lines, props, and futures, as well as daily fantasy strategies and analysis. Make sure to follow THW Bets on Twitter and get the latest news on everything sports betting related. Also, if you do decide to bet, please do so responsibly. And if you or anyone you know has a problem with gambling, please check out the resources that we have in the description below. Fantastic guides on to help you through whatever you're going through at this current moment. Starting off to kick off the show, as we mentioned off the top, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning kicked off their series. We had a really great preview episode last week before the series kicked off. 3 games in, Toronto is up 2-1 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. They had a 5-0 shutout win in game 1, a 5-3 loss in game 2, and a 5-2 win in game 3. And if you told me that we would be able to get 13 goals past Andrei Vasilevskiy at the beginning in 3 games, I would probably, laugh in your face, because I thought this was going to be a little bit more tight of a series, but here we are. Alex, first 3 games are in the books. What have you noticed with this Maple Leafs team, and even with the Lightning, if you want to chime in on that side as well?
Yeah, well, the series has been high octane to start so far, as advertised. Both teams are very, very good offensively, and I know the Lightning haven't scored too many goals so far, but they are always a very intimidating team. Even during game 3, there were certain points when I don't think any Leaf fan was comfortable when they were up 3-0, and they almost let it slip away from them, but they didn't, which is good. Yeah. Yeah, I think the big thing of the series so far has been the fact that the Leafs have been able to solve Andrei Vasilevskiy early, because heading into this series, we've seen them get stood up by goalies in the past. Obviously, Carey Price was playing like Carey Price in last year's playoffs. They ran into goaltending issues against Joonas Korpisalo in the bubble, which I don't know if anyone would have saw that coming, but it happened. So I think the Leafs came into this series knowing, hey, this is a guy who, when he turns it on, he can get super, super hot, and he can be the toughest goalie in the league to solve. So I think it's big that they've been able to solve him early on. And I think the biggest thing for them in the rest of the series is going to be making sure that he doesn't find a groove at any point. They can't let him get into a groove, or else the series is going to be way harder to close out. It's already going to be kind of hard to close out because, like I said, this is the defending Stanley Cup champions, the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. So, the Leafs basically have been playing them hard so far, which is good. I liked even in game 2 when they lost, how they didn't quit and they almost came back and made things interesting. That's something I'm not sure we would have seen from previous Leafs teams. So that's a good sign. I think the biggest thing with Tampa Bay, though, in getting out of this series is just, they need to understand that the Tampa Bay Lightning are not a team that you can beat just by playing at the top of your game. The Leafs and Lightning are pretty much right at the same space. So what they need to do is they need to keep playing at the top of their game, but then they also have to find ways to get Tampa Bay off of their game. And so far that's been working out for them because Tampa Bay hasn't been scoring goals too much and Vasilevsky hasn't been his normal self. So I think the quicker that the Leafs can wrap this up and keep solving Vasilevsky, don't let him find his rhythm or get into a groove at any point, I think they'll be fine. But it's been a good start to the series so far, all things considered.
Yeah, you mentioned trying to throw Vasilevsky off his game, and it really is difficult, especially we know how well his record is when dealing with a loss. I believe he's 14-0, possibly. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to jinx it because, the game hasn't happened just yet. But we know how great he is at able to bounce back from, a tough loss. And granted, it was 3-2 for most of the time, and they got 2 empty net goals in game 3. But you did mention how they're able to solve him, and I think maybe they may have a game plan because I believe in game 1 on that shorthanded break from David Kampf, it went over blocker side. The second goal again in game 3 went over blocker side. That granted, he had some traffic dealing with in front of him. I believe that I can't remember who the defender was, but it was blocking his view. So I want to know if maybe is the blocker side going to be Vasilevsky's weak point, or then again, Vasilevsky is Vasilevsky. Really doesn't have too many flaws to his game. Is that going to be something that the Maple Leafs kind of use to their advantage? And even in the second goal, when, they kind of drew Vasilevsky out of position with that patience from Lyubushkin going over to Colin Blackwell, and the movement he tried to get with the blocker didn't quite work out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try and analyze Andrei Vasilevsky as if I know what his weaknesses are, but based on what we've watched so far and gathering everything that we as fans can gather from watching the games, definitely seems like the Leafs have sort of found a bit of a spot with that blocker side on Vasilevsky. They've beaten him there a couple of times. And obviously I'm sure Sheldon Keefe's been telling him the same thing. I don't think this is a groundbreaking development for a couple of fans who are watching the game, but I think that the Leafs should probably just keep doing what they know works. I mean, if scoring on Andrei Vasilevsky blocker side is something that they've been able to do over the past couple of games, there's no reason they should stop doing it until at the very least Vasilevsky figures out that the other team is sort of cracked the code of where his weaknesses and strengths are. But I think the fact that the depth has shown up, especially, has been huge. David Kampf is, like you said, he scored 2 goals. Both goals kind of went same area of the net. So I think the Leafs should just keep doing what they're doing. I mean, offense hasn't been an issue for them so far. They've scored 13 goals in the first 3 games. And you do have to worry, obviously, about Andrei Vasilevsky kind of heating up and cutting down on the goal scoring from the Leafs, which is, I mean, it's probably going to happen at some point. But I think as long as the Leafs are ready for that and have a different plan on how to beat Vasilevsky, if he starts figuring it out, I think they'll be fine. But yeah, as of right now, if there's an obvious weakness and an obvious, point where the Leafs can beat Vasilevsky, and they've been able to so far, they got to keep doing it because they got 7 games at max to get out of this series. And I think the quicker they can do that, the better. So might as well just keep doing what works.
Yeah, you mentioned that how well this team is also playing in terms of like not giving up, not giving in to the pressure that Tampa Bay is inflicting on them. And we saw that they tried to bait them with the physicality, the suspension to Clifford, the poor results or poor decisions from Wayne Simmons in game 2. You want to play with that edge and mentality, but you don't want to cross the line. And they didn't cross that line as much in game 3. But then again, overall for the series, if you're looking at the underlying analytics, it's in Tampa Bay's favor. But at the same time, Toronto has that advantage in the most important part, the goals. And whatever goal you could get in the playoffs, it's going to be very crucial. So 7-3 in terms of 5-on-5 play, 13-7 again, overall in all situations. And as we all know, that game 4 is happening tonight, the day that we are recording, but we won't get into that just yet. We will give our thoughts when the game happens next week, or when we record next week. But obviously the main sticking point going into this series was the play of Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner. We know Matthews kind of went snake bitten last year. Mitch Marner went virtually invisible with only 4 assists in that series and no goals. Hasn't scored a goal since 2018-19 until game 1. So I'm curious to know if what based on what they've heard from fans, media, critics, everyone alike, have both Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner silenced the doubters, the critics, and saying that, hey, we're not just showing up in the regular season, we are making a difference in the playoffs?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think the critics are going to go away until they win a round. I think that's just the reality of it. When you're a team like Toronto, when you're in a market like Toronto, where arguably the biggest hockey market in the country and in the continent even, there's going to be a lot of microscopes on you. And especially when there's a narrative like the first round one, it's going to be hard to silence the critics on that front until they accomplish that. However, I think at the very least, they are sort of showing the critics that they're not just a couple of star players who, act cute and have a great regular season and then disappear come playoff time. I know last season was bad for that because they did sort of, to an effect, disappear, mostly Marner. But I think so far, at the very least this year, they both had 3 points in game 1. And I think that was a great way for them to come out and sort of show the fans like, hey, we're not the disappearing come playoff time players that you guys think we are and that we've been called all summer. Granted, I think that could change before the end of the series. If Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner obviously go the rest of the series without recording a single point, then that conversation might start up again. But I think as of right now, they're doing fine. And, it hasn't been the same issue as last year where, for example, you look at the fact that William Nylander led the team in scoring. And the issue is that William Nylander was scoring, but nobody else was. Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner have done a lot of scoring. They're co-leading the series in points, I'm pretty sure, of people on the Leafs. And because they've gotten all this offense out of the way early on, it's also not only have they been the ones that have been scoring goals and sort of shedding that narrative that they can't produce in the playoffs, but at the same time, their depth has been stepping up too. So it's not like we're sitting here having this conversation saying Matthews and Marner are scoring, so they're carrying the Leafs. It's like the entire team has been stepping up as a whole, which I think also makes things look better on them and has sort of taken away from, for example, guys like Tavares and Nylander who have gotten off the slow starts in this series. I think if Matthews and Marner were the only ones scoring, I think we might be having a different conversation about those two, but everybody seems to be stepping up when called upon, which is a great sign to start this series.
Yeah, Mitch Marner already has his second best playoff point totals with 6 already and already matched his career high of 2 goals in the playoffs from 2017-18 and 18-19. And Auston Matthews has been fairly consistent, scoring at least 5 points or more in the playoffs. He only had 2 in 2017-18, but he has 5 in 3 games. Marner 6 in 3. They are both co-leading or leading the team in scoring, Marner with the 6 and Matthews with the 5. But yeah, I think it goes back to Matthews' comment that we talked about last week about how, playing when it matters most, playing when things are on the line. And I think now that they got this mentality, they got a better leadership core and group where you have players who know their role. I think maybe last year, I think there were a lot of expectations solely on the big names, especially Marner and Matthews. And although they're producing, which is great, but I think you're getting that depth scoring that, really comes out in the playoffs. And this is kind of translates or, transitions well into our next topic, which is the depth scoring coming through big time. Obviously, we mentioned David Kampf at the top. Ilya Mikheyev has 2 goals. Pierre Engvall, 3 assists in the series so far. And to me, this line is basically what you would want in a championship caliber team. Granted, they may not be as physical as what we saw with the Coleman, Gord, and Goudreau line that we saw in the past from the Tampa Bay Lightning, but they are effective. They got the speed, they got the transition, and we saw them on the penalty kill quite a bit, how they're able to create dangerous chances. Obviously, Wayne Simmons also said that depth is going to be an important part. Is the depth going to shine more so despite the fact that the stars are scoring, even so that, they may not get most of the credit? You're on.
There
mute.
we go. There we go.
There
Yeah,
we go.
I saw that notification pop up right away. Yeah, I mean, I think the depth has been amazing this year, especially when you compare it to last year. And you know, I've seen some people say that this team doesn't seem that much different from last season's team. I disagree with that notion completely, because when you look at the fact that the Leafs depth pieces went from, say, Jumbo Joe, Alex Galchenyuk, Nick Foligno, if you want to throw him in there, say those, I'll use those three guys as an example. Those three depth guys compared to this year when it's Andrei Kasha, David Kampf, Pierre Engvall, Ilya Mikheyev, the depth has just been on another level this year. And like, we're already seeing guys scoring big goals that wouldn't typically be in that position. Colin Blackwell has a goal. David Kampf has 2 goals, 2 huge goals, I'll mention. And I put a tweet out about David Kampf the other day. It seems like, first of all, it's amazing how much he scored this year compared to last year. I remember when the Leafs signed him, everyone was looking at those Jay Fresh charts that had all the red all across it, and he only had 1 goal. And we're thinking, the Leafs just signed a guy that doesn't score. But he's, had a career high, 12 goals this year. And his goals, even bleeding back into the regular season, he scored that tying goal in that first game against Chicago to sort of bring the Leafs out of that first initial slump. He scored the game-winning goal in that home game against Chicago when there was like 1 minute left. And he scored 2 big goals in the playoffs so far, 2 insurance markers. So it's amazing to see how much he's stepping up. And we haven't even touched on his defensive impact so far. Well, actually, I saw a funny tweet. David Kampf, as of right now, has more goals than he does offensive zone starts. So he's taken 40 defensive zone draws and 1 offensive zone draw, and he has 2 goals. So do what you want with that information. But Kampf has been amazing this year. And I think the depth as a whole, it's just made the experience much better for the Leafs, because if Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner, and actually I'm not even going to include them because, like I said, they're both leading the team in scoring in this series so far. But say, for example, when guys like Tavares and Nylander have slow streaks, and they're not really contributing offensively, it's almost like you don't notice it because guys like Kampf and Engvall are showing up. So, I've been very, very impressed with the depth so far.
Yeah, and it should be worth noting that his goal, his third marker of that game 3, stood as the game-winning goal, because at that point it was 3-2, and then they got the 2 empty net goals, both from Ilya Mikheyev. But yeah, I mean, I think when I was talking about one piece that I wrote about the Maple Leafs will win if the depth scoring comes live. Obviously, again, you want your stars to perform, but if you don't have that depth scoring when they need to score key goals, like we've seen I'm going to say in all 3 games, because even in that second game, even though they were down, Kerfoot got things going with a really good mark to try and, spark a comeback with the Maple Leafs. So the fact that they got some more depth scoring going on right now compared to the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think this is going to be a really great sign for them that, they're not going to be messed around with, that they got the transitional play. And you mentioned David Kampf's, zone starts for him to score or, try and get offense from the defense. That's always going to be a big factor as well. I mean, no matter how you look at that, despite the fact that he's getting all those starts, the fact that they're able to quickly move up, keep up, and get that zone time, even early on in the season when it was Kampf, Kasha, and I believe Mikheyev and Engvall were rotating in and out. They've had the same identity throughout the whole entire season, and it's carried over into this playoffs. And yeah, the depth scoring is absolutely fantastic. If they're able to keep this up and, provide that stability, again, you can't help but think that this is one area that you would point to the Maple Leafs advantage as the series goes on. But then again, game 4 against the Lightning in their home barn, you got to be ready and you got to come out flying just like they did in game 3. So hopefully I was going to say all 4 lines, but at the top 6 and the bottom 6 know what's on the line, because if they win this game, they're going back to Toronto with elimination on their mind to knock off the defending Stanley Cup champs. To recap the show, once again, this week's episode is brought to you by the Hockey Writers Sports Betting Guide, a brand new source for daily sports betting odds, lines, props, futures, as well as daily fantasy strategies and analysis. Make sure to follow THW Bets on Twitter to get the latest updates and news on sports betting. And again, if you do decide to bet, please do so responsibly. And if you or anyone you know has a problem with gambling, be sure to check out the resources that we have down in the description below. Moving into the second portion or second half of our show, we talked about Andrei Vasilevskiy, and even one of the main sticking points that was on my mind was Jack Campbell. And if he was able to try and at least outbattle Andrei Vasilevskiy in 3 games, even despite that loss in game 2, I have no complaints about Jack Campbell's play. I mean, he's been solid. He's made big saves, especially that one on Steven Stamkos late in game 3, which gave me flashbacks to Frederik Andersen on David Pastrnak, which was also a game 3 back in the 2018 playoffs. Hopefully it's a better end result for the Maple Leafs this time around. But I mean, if throughout the series, or even if the Maple Leafs do win, is it safe to say that Jack Campbell is going to be the MVP of if they do win?
If they win the series or if they win the cup?
Baby steps. Let's go with the series first. Let's go with the series first.
Okay. Yeah, if they win the series, I mean, if he keeps playing the way he has played so far, then I think it'd be hard to give it to anybody else. And you know what? I think out of all the narratives that are dreamt up about this Leafs team, I think the most unfair one would be the one where Jack Campbell is the one that has to prove something. And Jack Campbell is, the series hinges on him, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I understand that the Leafs need Jack Campbell to play at his best if they want to get out of the series. But at the same time, this guy not showing up in the playoffs has never been an issue. And I say never, even though it's really only this season and last season, but even last year, I mean, hell, you can even go back to when the Leafs traded for him. When the Leafs originally traded for Campbell, they needed a backup goalie more than anything else. He came in and stabilized the crease, gave Freddie Andersen some rest. Then when Freddie Andersen got injured last season, Campbell stepped in, immediately set a record for consecutive victories to start a season. And he goes into the playoffs and he finished that season or that series against Montreal with a .934 save percentage.
Yeah.
And it's like, sure, you can say what you want about that goal he allowed to Gallagher in game 7 last year, but that was like the one bad goal he allowed all series. Campbell was electric for the Leafs between the crease, and he was far from the reason they lost that series. And you can say the same thing about the way he's played in this series so far. Yeah, he didn't have a great game on Tuesday or whatever it would have been on Wednesday, I guess, in Tampa Bay.
Yes.
Or game 2. Yes. Jeez. Yeah, he didn't have a great game in game 2. But again, that's one of those games where it's like it's kind of hard to win and control the puck and get possession and put yourself ahead when you're killing a penalty the entire game. So I think Campbell's finally getting some of the respect that he deserves. And I really just almost more than anybody else, I hope the Leafs can get out of this series for Jack Campbell, because I think he's finally getting an opportunity to prove what he can do in a full-time starting role, just like he was expected to be when he was drafted 11th overall or whatever it was in 2010. You talk about a late bloomer. Jack Campbell's been amazing so far. And I think as long as he keeps playing the way he is, I think the Leafs offense is good enough, and they can sort of shut Tampa Bay down enough to the point where Jack Campbell doesn't have to worry about standing on his head. So as long as he keeps playing the way he is, then I'm happy.
A little bit of a side note, if those 2 goals in the third period didn't happen and Jack Campbell was still keeping his team in the game in game 2, I think it would have been a different outcome for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It would have been probably a tie game at this point if, Kerfoot's goal still stood up. But, fate happens for a reason. And yeah, you mentioned his stellar play, .924 save percentage and .237 or 2.37 goals against average in this series so far. Better numbers than Andrei Vasilevskiy, but then again, never count out Andrei Vasilevskiy. I do agree with you that in the sense he has done everything that he could to keep his team in the game. And especially when Tampa was, laying the pressure on even more in the third period in game 3, he stood tall. He gave his team a fighting chance, and he stopped the bleeding whenever he needed to. And I think that's going to be key going forward, that even at the beginning of the game, he made some very phenomenal and dangerous saves to not give Tampa Bay a early 1 or 2-0 lead in that game. And the Maple Leafs kind of thrived on that. Hopefully they took that as some motivation that we got the goalie, we got the early saves out of the way. Let's try and get this back and try and gain some momentum. So hopefully they continue to do so. And Jack Campbell is going to be the reason for possibly a few more victories down the road. Moving over to our final topic, and this was just recent. And Alex, I know you've got a lot to say on this, but Jon Cooper, fantastic coach, back-to-back Stanley Cup champ for a reason. He's absolutely phenomenal. But Maple Leafs Twitter, including myself, kind of don't understand where he's going with some of his latest comments. He said in regards to Jack Campbell, and this is from Chris Johnson from TSN, we scored 7 goals on him the last 2 games. So if he's going to sit here and have a 350 goals against average in every 2-game set, we'll take that. Then he goes, and then this is from Kevin McGran from the Toronto Star. Jon Cooper said this on Playing the Maple Leafs. Goal scoring against these guys, that's not a worry. I'm just going to get your take on this, Alex, before I give mine. And before you do, you are on mute, just to give you a quick heads up. But
thank you for that.
What do you make of these comments from Cooper? Is he trying to get into their heads? Is he trying to sow some doubt? Is he trying to say that, hey, he is a coach of a Stanley Cup champ back-to-back for a reason, because, you're supposed to have that swagger, that mentality. You're the team to be beat. Is it going to work, or is it even working? Are the Maple Leafs even phase?
I don't think they're phased so far, but you know what? I've said this a number of times. I want Jon Cooper to keep running his mouth. I really do. Because every single time the Leafs, well, not every single time, but within the past couple of seasons, when Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner sort of grew into this role where they were the true leaders of this team, and they're the ones with the most pressure on them, sort of, I'm not including the seasons like 2017 and 2018 where they had their father figures like Patrick Marleau, etc. In recent years, when the pressure's been highest for them to do something in the playoffs, they've had all the odds in their favor. Last season, everybody thought the Leafs were going to walk all over Montreal. The year before, even, Columbus was nowhere near as good offensively as the Leafs. So, there were a lot of people that expected the Leafs to just make quick work of their first round opponents. And this season couldn't be the opposite. Like, even before the Leafs knew they were facing off against Tampa Bay in the first round, when it could have been them, Florida, or Boston, everybody's saying, oh, well, they're not going to last in a series against one of those teams. Even look back to when Tampa Bay beat Toronto 8-1. Everyone was like, oh, this team's going to get swept by Tampa Bay in the first round. So I sort of like the fact that the Leafs are, quote unquote, the underdogs right now. I sort of like how they've got this underdog mentality, and everybody outside of their fan base and their own market thinks that they're going to lose to Tampa Bay. Even people within their own market could still think that the Leafs are going to come out in the first round. And I like the Leafs having that mindset. And to me, Jon Cooper talking about how the Leafs are, saying, first of all, when he said goal scoring against these guys isn't an issue, I didn't really take that the same way as everybody else did. I know a lot of people probably took that as, oh, he's saying Jack Campbell's not a good goalie, or he's saying the Leafs are not good defensively. I think he was just saying that they know that the Tampa Bay Lightning are a good offensive team and they can score goals. That 8-1 victory proved it. But I want Cooper to keep talking. I want him to keep talking about how they know they can beat the Leafs, because to me, it's more bulletin board material for the dressing room. And I think that that's how the Leafs are thriving the most. These are some of the best playoff games we've seen them play these past couple of days, especially game 1, game 2, and game 3 were a little less. But either way, I like the fact that the Leafs are sort of having people like put them down when they're in the middle of winning, and keep. Jon Cooper can say whatever he wants. I want him to keep talking, because to me, every single time he doubts the Leafs, or he says something along the lines of, oh, we know we can do this against them, or, oh, if they're going to do this, then we're fine with that, etc. I think the more he does that, the better motivation it serves as for the Leafs. And I just want him to keep running his mouth. I want him to keep talking, because I think it's working out for the Leafs in the end.
Yeah, in regards to that goal scoring against comments, I mean, we've seen the Maple Leafs collapse defensively throughout the past. I mean, let's face it, defense is going to be a very big X factor for them going forward. And for the most part, you've gotten stability from that top 4, especially with Lyubushkin, Riley, Muzzin, and Brody. And I'm just going to say this, Jake Muzzin, this is the Jake Muzzin we had hoped for and anticipated would come back for the playoffs, because this is what we saw last year in Montreal before he went down with the injury in game 6. What we saw early on against Columbus before he got injured. So hopefully, and now you bring in Mark Giordano. This team is now more stable on the back end to try and keep those goals out of the net and mitigate those chances. And I mean, Tampa scored 2. The defense locked in and dialed in, even when things got a little bit hectic in their own end. They didn't panic. They didn't falter. Although I think maybe the clearing attempts would have been a little bit better. But yeah, I do agree that this serves motivation for the Maple Leafs, that if people are still going to count them out and they're not even the favorites anymore, this is the perfect time for them to run away with it. This is the perfect time for them to prove everyone wrong. And, I picked Toronto to win in 7, with our predictions. And yeah, they may still seem like an underdog, but this is the best team we've seen on paper that can make a deep run where they got that balance. So, for him to say the comments about Jack Campbell, I think he's picking and choosing what games he wants, even though that there have been 3 games and he's just discrediting that shutout. I don't know if he is, but to pick those 2 games and just dissect that, to me, that doesn't seem right. But then again, I guess maybe it's also trying to motivate his players as well, because they are in a spot where it's win or, it's going to be even more pressure on you, knowing you're the Stanley Cup champs down whatever games you're going to be later on. So I think it serves as motivation for both sides. I mean, he believes in his group. Why wouldn't he? But also the Maple Leafs have Tampa Bay right where they want them, and they're in a good spot to try and maintain the spot that they're in. So we'll see if those comments continue to roll in. We'll see if either team takes that to heart. But in the end, we could only watch and see what happens, especially with game 4 going on. By the time that this is up, chances are game 4 will be complete and we will know where we are at. That is it for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Once again, thank you for tuning in. This episode is brought to you by the Hockey Writers Sports Betting Guide, the brand new source for daily sports betting odds, lines, props, futures, as well as daily fantasy strategies and analysis. Be sure to follow THW Bets on Twitter to get the latest news on everything sports betting. Once again, if you do decide to bet, please do so responsibly. And if you or anyone you know has a problem with gambling, please check out the resources that we have in the description below. Well, that's it again for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Game 4, be ready, be set. I know we are, and we will be in a panic. For Alex Hobson, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we will see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.